Okay, welcome committee members and members of the public to the September 18th, 2024 Governor's Workforce Development Board Executive Committee meeting. For the record, my name is Ken Evans, Vice Chair of the Governor's Workforce Development Board. Katie, will you please take roll call, confirm a quorum, and verify posting?
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first off, for roll, we have Vice Chair Evans.
Present.
Thank you. We have Marshall Steed.
Present.
Thank you. Crystal Slaughter.
Present.
Thank you. Councilman Black.
And he sent a message that he'll be excused today. He has to cover some meetings in Las Vegas.
Okay. We had a couple other pre-notified absences, so I don't know if we'll get quorum today then. The other pre-notified absences we had were for Jerry Merritt, Robert Benner, and then Chair Anderson. So we're not going to hit quorum today.
Okay, and my understanding is if we don't have quorum, we can still conduct the meeting. We just won't take action on anything.
Yeah.
Everything will be for information only.
Yep. So the minutes we can't vote on. You could see SCP 1.4. You won't be able to vote on it.
Okay, understood.
And I'm just going to confirm that the agenda and notice for this meeting were properly posted pursuant to Nevada's open meeting law, NRS 241020.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gilbertson.
Yep.
Okay, before we proceed, I, as the vice chair, kindly request that anyone who speaks today, please make sure you identify yourself for the record. With that, we'll continue on to agenda item number 4, which is the time we set aside for public comments. Members of the public on remote technology are invited to provide comments at this time. No action may be taken on any matters during public comments until the matter itself has been included on an agenda item or on an agenda as an item for possible action. Any public comments on the telephone? Okay. Any public comments on Zoom at this time? Okay. We will table agenda item number 5, which would be a motion to approve the July 17, 2024 Executive Committee minutes. We'll table that, bring it back, or bring it forward for a future meeting unless we happen to achieve quorum before the end of this meeting. Similarly, moving on to agenda item number 6, we're going to table agenda item number 6, which would normally be an SCP 1.4, State Compliance Policy 1.4. We are going to table that as well, unless we happen to achieve a quorum before the end of this meeting. We'll roll that forward to a future executive committee meeting as well. With that, I'm going to check here. I see Mr. Goodrich has joined us, and is I see Ms. Brager's here as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take agenda item number 8 out of order, and we'll come back to agenda item number 7. Let me state at this point in time, just for the record, although I wasn't able to attend the strategic planning subcommittee or the last board meeting, I had to take off for some business. I was able to briefly skim through the strategic plan subcommittee video. I was able to get the highlights. So when we get to agenda item number 7, we'll come back to that. Okay, with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 8 for discussion and information only. I want to invite the executive committee members who are present, as well as we invited 2 of our Governor Workforce Development Board business representatives, Mr. Ken Goodrich and Ms. Susan Brager, as well as the title agency partners who happen to be present. What I want to do is continue the dialogue that's started at the last full board meeting regarding title agency data reporting. I'll facilitate the discussion But I want to be clear that any executive committee members, either Ken or Susan or any of the title partners, are encouraged to participate in this conversation. And again, my understanding is that a conversation was started regarding the type of information or data that the committee members wanted to see so that we could have discussions that would contribute to the improvement of the overall workforce development system. It's not meant in any manner to be, I'm going to use some language here. It's not meant to be overly administrative or prescriptive. Again, it's just meant to collect the data necessary so that the board can review information, make some decisions that'll contribute to the overall improvement of the system. So with that, what I want to first do is recognize Ms. Brager for her comments, and then Mr. Goodrich, I know you had some ideas as well. I'll ask you to present those ideas, and then we'll have a free-flowing discussion from there. Ms. Brager?
Thank you. I'm so sorry that I'm not on video, but my camera's not working. I really appreciate this because we've been for 2-3 serious years really working on getting to the next step. But sometimes if we don't know where we've been, we can't get to where we want to go. And I don't think there's, and like Mr. Evans said, this is not a blame or a where is it or what can we do. We're all in this together. You know, some of us it's your everyday job. For myself, it's a quasi volunteer commitment within the other things that I do. And so I think we need more information. And Mr. Goodrich was spot on and really asked some, I thought, pertinent questions at our last meeting, which we greatly appreciated. So in regards to, you know, people that work within the system feel like we all know what's happening. And a lot of times, like where people can go get jobs. I mean, I asked a lot of people that I know that need a job. They don't even know where that is or what they do or how they start. So once again, not a blame thing, but how do we get to be able to identify where and I hope we can start saying that we're a statewide organization. This north-south needs to go away, even though I've been here pretty much my whole life. How do we get the information out to those that need it? And I know that people think they have it, but I purposely the last few weeks asked a lot of people, and some people in the know and some people not in the know. And that's one of my questions is how do we identify to better serve the underserved population to be able to get work? And the other thing that I think we need to do, and I mentioned it in the last meeting, we need to find out how we can seal records when it's time for people to seal records, because they can't have the future if they have to keep writing down the stuff that they've already done all their restitution in. And so it makes their lives very complicated when did they make a mistake? Yes, but should they have to live that mistake? That's what's wrong with our prison system. So I'm going to leave it at that for right now of where I'm coming from. And then as far as the child care committee, which is completely separate from this, Katie and I are going to have an amazing meeting next week to see how far we can get with those that really have more information than we've been able to get so far. So thank you for that. And I hope everybody understands where I'm coming from and how we can get where we're going once we have that other information. Thank you, Mr. Evans, for that ability to be able to share that information.
Thank you, Ms. Brager, for helping to set the tone for the desired conversation today. With that, I'll just quickly preface as a part of the conversation, and then just in general, I think Mr. Goodrich had an idea for big picture. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he had an idea for where the focus could be, which in turn would help drive the type of data we look for. And with that, I'll stop talking and turn it over to Mr. Goodrich to help prime the pump for the rest of the discussion. Mr. Goodrich.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with some stuff that may sound a little controversial. So please stop me if I get out of order. Okay. But I've been I've been on this board now for about a year, and I'm still unclear what we do. I'm unclear what we're supposed to accomplish. I know I go to the board meetings and, you know, we talk a lot about data collection and get some reports from some of the agencies, but I'm really unclear what, you know, do we have any authority in this board? What's our role in this whole thing? And, you know, I went to a event in Reno recently where the governor spoke, and he made the comment that, you know, there's over 300 boards similar to this one in the state of Nevada, and many of them don't have a plan, and they don't know, they don't have a plan. They don't have any results, and you know, they have executive directors that are getting paid and no one's accomplished anything. And he's trying to sort through all these boards, right? And I thought, are we one of those boards? Because it seems to me, not sure what we do here. So that said, when we started talking last meeting about yeah, well, I guess I just brought up and say, look, we're always having this constant conversation about data collection, and we can't get the data, and the data is all from every agency, comes over different. Doesn't seem like we have the authority to tell them to send it over the way we need it, or is that practical in terms of gathering the data? I don't know how many records it is. I don't know enough about it, but I know this. Seems like for the year I've been here, we're just talking about this data we can't get and trying to find ways to get data. So with that challenge, one, I'd like to kind of define what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish with this board? Who are we accountable to? What are the deliverables? You know, I don't want to be part of something myself that we're just a straw board, and, you know, we're just kind of a gratuitous group that, you know, gets to say that we're on this board for the governor. That's not my mission. My mission is to use my resources and influence and experience to help Nevadans get back to work. As a business owner, I see it's a challenge to find employees anyway, and I think it's good for business that you know, that we're all kind of pitching in to try to help increase the labor force. So when it comes down to the data, what I said in the last meeting was, how about we just pick one thing? If we don't really, if we're not getting cooperation, and I don't know if this is the case, this might not be fair, but if we're not getting cooperation, we're getting pushback from the agencies look at us like a straw board, then let's just start counting what we can count, which is we can extrapolate from the reports that we do get how many jobs were created, and we'll make a definition of what we call a job. Is a job 30 days, 60 days, 12 months? What is a job? And we start counting that. And we report that information to whoever we're supposed to report to. I assume it's the governor. But, you know, we start right there. And then we gauge each of the groups based on the one number. We can rank them. Then we can start maybe adding, well, this is what we spend to get this many people have a job. And maybe they'll step up and start cooperating with data if that's the challenge, and say, well, no, you're looking at that wrong. And maybe between this process, we'll get some more cooperation to come away with a data set that's meaningful for somebody in the state to make decisions, because I assume that's what we're doing here. So one, I don't want to, while I appear ignorant here, perhaps somebody fill me in. Who are we accountable to, and what are we trying to accomplish with this thing? And number two, if we're going to go with data and we're getting pushback, then let's start counting the thing we can count, and then start ranking people based on what we can count. And then maybe they'll step up and start giving us better data to count better things. Make sense?
Yes, this is Vice Chair Evans. Thank you very much, Mr. Goodrich. Here's what I'll say. I'm going to take both parts of what you mentioned. Regarding the purpose of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, and it's captured in our strategic plan, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's to do two things. One part of it is to take a look at the statewide Governor's Workforce Development system, and that's composed of the title agencies, that's composed of the two workforce entities, local workforce entities, meaning Nevada Works in the north, Workforce Connections in the south, as well as all the employment training providers that are approved, meaning they're the vendors that do the frontline work. Take a look at that system and then see how it's working, see if there's room for improvement. And to your point, under the guise of working on behalf of the governor to make sure that the governor has a system in place that services two clients. First and foremost, obviously, potential employees or candidates for employment, but then number two, just as important to the point that you made, service the potential employers who in essence are the job creators, whether they're small, large, public, or private. That's the purpose behind this board, is to look at the overall system and provide some feedback and guidance on how to move it forward and improvement so it works for all parties concerned.
Feedback to the governor, to governor's office, or feedback to the agencies?
We typically would provide that feedback to the agencies, but we should keep the governor in the loop as well.
And you know, again, do the agencies regard this board as a asset?
Well, I will tell you from my perspective, there's definitely been some resistance and pushback at times. I'm going to speak candidly now, and I welcome others to calibrate what I say accordingly. I'm completing my 6th year on this board. The first few years on the board, I'll just tell you how I felt as a board member, but I think my chair shares this sentiment. It felt like, yes, Ms. Brager, I see you. It felt like at times we just basically came in, we received reports passively. There may have been some state compliance policies that we approved. Definitely in terms of the compliance plan, we may have looked at that again in kind of a passive manner, but we weren't necessarily proactively and interactively trying to provide some feedback and guidance to improve the system as we're chartered to do. In fact, what I would share with you, Mr. Goodrich, it's actually prescribed what we're supposed to do and our authority to do it by the U.S. Department of Labor. Ms. Brager, did you have some comments you wanted to add?
Yeah, I will be very brief. I think one thing, and I've electedly served the community so far 26 years. So I understand when you ask for data or data, you have to be very careful. If you do not ask, and this is no reflection on anyone on these committees, but it's happened many times. If you know what you need, but don't ask it right, you get a lot of 800 pages or 400 pages or 200 pages when you're looking for something specific and you feel like you've said it. And I'm sorry, but this is really factual. So on this board, if we really, for workforce development, you have LVGEA that gets people to come here, sometimes needs employees, sometimes not. I'd like to see what happens at something like the Sahara West Library is doing a job fair tomorrow. And if I'm done with these clients, I'd like to just go there and observe. because that to me would be really important. So if I'm being too bold or too straightforward, I agree with Mr. Goodrich. I don't need another committee, but I have a belief that we can be successful. So I'm pretty stubborn on staying, mainly because of the child care situation, but also let's be precise in what we need to ask for. I don't want to beat that to death, but that's been the problem. How many jobs have there really been? Do people know where they can really go? And I'm saying it again because I've talked to those that need jobs and they've never heard of the Nevada, whatever it's called. I'm sorry, I just lost what it's called, that they could go to and figure out what they need in their lives. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Ms.
Go ahead,
Brager.
Ken.
It's employee NV.
Yeah, well, they don't even know about it, those of need. I'm being serious. I want to go there and visit, so I want to set up an appointment.
Thank you, Ms. Brager. So, Mr. Goodrich, that hopefully addresses the first question or the first part of your question. As far as the data portion, I think the idea is, and it sounds like we're coalescing behind this idea of jobs, because ultimately jobs are the impact that we're supposed to get out of the system. Now, there can be discussion about the longevity of the position, the level of compensation for the position. But my understanding is, again, for example, I always go back to the U.S. Department of Labor. It prescribes that the various agencies are supposed to track and report on 6 months after completion of some training, and then 18 months after completion of training, what's the status of the person that interacted with our system?
If I can go ahead and jump in here.
Go ahead, Ms. Olson.
It's 6 months after the exit from the program, and it's 12 months after, or 4 quarters after the exit of the program. And I'm curious to know how many of the board members have actually read Title 1A of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, because that is where it actually lists out the functions of the state board. And it also includes this law was not just Department of Labor, but it was also U.S. Department of Education. And the language in the law does talk about recommendations on actions. It talks about the identification of barriers, development of strategies. So I think that if you've not read Title 1A in the law, you should, because that gives you the functions that are expected from the law of the board. And I do take exception to the idea that we are not giving you data because we don't want to, or we're not cooperating. What has happened in the past couple of years is that there's been a lack of understanding of what data exists, how it is collected, when it is reported, and what we can actually provide. It also has been a lack of understanding of how the data differs between the title programs. For instance, Milton Brett can back me up on this. For Title 1 and 3, a portion of their participants are subject to measurable skill gains. For Title 2, adult education, 100% of our participants are subject to those measurable skill gains. So when we report a lesser percentage, than say Title I or III. It's actually a much greater number of the whole because of the way that the data is required to report federally. So I really do take exception to the idea that we're not wanting to provide data or cooperating to provide data, because there really needs to be an understanding of what we can realistically provide and an understanding of the comparison of that data. One of the meetings that we had not too long ago, there was a big hullabaloo about the dollar amount that Title IV spends per participant. But the population for Title IV are individuals with disabilities. Somebody that is deaf can cost Title IV over $100 an hour for sign language interpreter service. So the difference in cost, it's not cut and dry. So I just wanted to get that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olson, for that insight and perspective. I'll come back to you, Mr. Goodrich, and then I'm also going to go to Mr. Stewart and Mr. Miller as well. Thank you for that, again, for that insight. And also thank you for correcting me on the 12 months versus 18 months per the U.S. Department of Labor requirements. Mr. Goodrich.
Nancy, I appreciate your information, good information. Thank you. I wasn't intending to infer that. Well, I wasn't sure why we're not getting the data. All this conversation about not getting, I wasn't sure, and I think I have clearly seen in the meetings that a lot of it comes in different forms. And as you say, or as you said earlier, you know, you got to know what to ask for. And there's all kinds of just different ways that we need to look at this. I just need to get a grounded on what are we trying to accomplish? What's our mission? Who are we accountable for? And, you know, have some concrete routine work that goes on in these meetings other than talking about not getting the data. And so, again, back to my original rant on last meeting, it was about, if we can't make sense or heads or tails out of it, can we get something, pick one thing where we can all agree on, like how many jobs did the system create this month, quarter, year? And then do we find that acceptable with the investment? And whatever duties that are set forth in the document you described earlier.
And thank you, Mr. Goodrich. And real quickly, and then I'll go to Mr. Stewart and then Mr. Miller. One of the things we've done is we provided that training in concert with the NGA. There's a slide presentation where they specifically extracted out the requirements that Ms. Olson talked about. So Katie, if you'll make a note to make sure that we provide that to Mr. Goodrich and actually provide it to the whole board as a refresher, so everybody understands, one, what we're chartered to do, and then two, the actual language in the regulation. That'll be helpful. Mr. Stewart.
Thanks. You know, I think this is a great conversation, and every time we have this conversation, we inch a little bit closer to kind of some common language and common concepts and thoughts around this. So, Mr. Goodrich and Ms. Brager, I would say this, that at a high level, the Governor's Workforce Development Board is setting the stage for the title partners to do their work. And so I know I'm really kind of oversimplifying it, but generally speaking, it's setting the strategy, the overall strategy. It's helping from an alignment perspective. It's engaging with stakeholders so that we can have these conversations and so on. And from an authority perspective, it's not traditional hierarchical authority, right? There's, from a governor's workforce development board, there's shared authority with the local workforce boards, for instance. And so, you know, if the governor's board has a vision, or if the state has a vision through the state plan, right, that really long document, there's a lot of stuff in there with the intent of really clarifying or setting that vision or strategy for the state, for the title partners. And then, you know, the title partners are then charged with operationalizing or implementing what that looks like. And I'll speak for the local boards. You know, if state compliance policies that get in front of the governor's board are meant to help guide the local boards with how we do our business. And it's compliance oriented, but it's also the state has the opportunity to kind of add some language that might fine tune things and send things in a particular direction if it so chooses to. And those, as you know, those state compliance policies go through this executive committee, and then they go through the full governor's board. So I think that from my perspective, in my opinion, the best way to look at the governor's board is how do we all work together right towards this common goal. I put in the chat there's a link to the CFRs, the regulations, that really kind of breaks down, you know, what is the purpose of a state workforce board, what is the composition, those types of things. So that may help at a high level for the governor's board to kind of really understand what the charge is, right? What the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is saying. What should a state board do, right? Doesn't mean it's all they can do, and it doesn't mean, you know, we can always have collaborative conversations and figure out what the implementation looks like. But I think at a high level, that's what that looks like. I understand, you know, it can appear, and it probably does appear, that there may be reservations, or you know, that the title partners may be reserved with regards to sharing data. I will say for Nevada Works, it's all public data. I mean, it's literally, with the exception of the personally identifiable information, you know, the data that we collect is shareable. I mean, we can definitely do that. I think that the challenge that we've had, and I've been with Nevada Works for 9 years, and so I've seen different iterations of this over time, is that there genuinely tends to be a disconnect between what the board is looking for and what we can provide, and how we can provide it in a way that is meaningful. Because we're not trying to hold data back. That is not the case at all. We will share whatever data. We'll share the raw data. I mean, that information is all available. Again, sometimes it needs to be aggregated up so that we're not sharing stuff that gets down to too personal level and whatnot. But when we talk about things like enrollments and number of trainings, and what the trainings were as far as occupational training, like what is the code that's associated with, for instance, for example, those things are all available. We can provide that information. That's honestly, it's easy to do, but we can certainly do that. When we start to talk about job fairs, for instance, as I heard Ms. Brager mention, that becomes a little bit different, in as much as that, you know, we'd stand there with a clicker on how many folks are coming in, or have them sign in, or those types of things. We don't always know the outcomes, because we can tell you how many people walk through the door, but we don't always know what that resulted in. We would have to rely on an employer, for instance, sharing that, and job offers aren't always made on site at that time. So that's not a roadblock. We would have to kind of reimagine what that looked like, and figure out what kind of data we could share. But I'll wrap it up with this. Speaking for Nevada Works, we will share whatever data in whatever way that you're looking for. Sometimes when we're asking questions, we're trying to contextualize what you're asking for so that we can provide you something. And I'm a firm believer in, once we provide you something, then we start the conversation with, well, what about this? What about this? Those conversations become more organic based on the data. Well, if you can provide me this, can you provide me this? One thing that I had mentioned in the last strategic planning meeting was that from a Department of Labor perspective, and really Department of Education as well, there are elements that there are data points that each participant we can report on. Understanding what those data elements are, at least at a high level, we might then be able to say, have a collaborative conversation and say, oh, you can provide this, then let's, over time, or this group or this demographic or this geographic area, how do we then begin to track those things? So I'm happy, on behalf of Nemattaworks, I'm happy to have those conversations. And if that's a dashboard, if it's a report that we provide to this group, even on a month, whatever, I can say that we'll put the work in, we'll do whatever needs to be done. I still think that at least from my perspective, there's somewhat of a disconnect on what it is that the governor's board wants to see, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stewart. Definitely appreciate that insight. Mr. Goodrich, one thing I'll share is that we're gonna do two things. Ms. Gilbertson is gonna pull together some excerpts from the training that we had in April that spelled out. And then in addition to that, here's what I want to say in response to what Mr. Stewart brought up. And I don't want this to be defensive, but I want this to provide some context. The Department of Labor Compliance Plan or State Plan is a compliance-oriented document. As such, when we started out on this journey 2.5 going on 3 years ago, we said that's like a 400 in the past. It may have been 500 to 600 pages. We said that's not realistic to expect the board, the title agencies, the providers to use that document as a means to, especially in real time, assess where we are, and then hopefully make some recommendations, give some guidance as a board about the pathway forward as far as how to use the system. So the thought was, let's create a strategic plan, hence a strategic planning committee, so that we can come up with the document similar to how other states came up with the document that would focus on goals, objectives, and ideally a jointly agreed upon action plan, as well as steps to achieve that. So that was the idea behind coming up with the strategic plan. It wasn't to duplicate in fact, far from it, was it to duplicate the compliance plan. The goal was to, as efficiently and effectively as possible, come up with a document that we could use as kind of a blueprint, playbook, however you want to put it, to move forward. Just wanted to provide that context. With that, let me go to Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Chair Evans. Brett Miller for the record, with WC, the Southern Board. Mr. Goodrich and Ms. Brager, and other executive committee members. I'm glad to have this discussion with you all. I'm going to talk a little bit, Mr. Goodrich, about that second part of your question, that, okay, what should we be looking at? I've done this work in the workforce development world for 12 years now as an analyst. So all I do is data and policy. It's what I live for. I did it for 10 years in the casinos before that. And I think that the secret sauce is actually in those 5 measures that WIOA specifies. And can I share something, Mr. Evans?
Yes, go ahead.
Let's see here. Okay, so this right here, for Title I, we have 3 programs, Mr. Goodrich. We have an adult program, a dislocated worker program, and a youth program. And we have 5 measures that we're responsible for with DOL. And there's a lot of critiques that can be said about these measures, that they're too slow, they lack granularity. But what I'm going to say, and what I contend, and what I've determined over the years, is that if you're running an employment and training program, you need to be concerned about employment, right? So this employed after second quarter, which is basically that 6-month mark, very important. If we can have the greatest cost PERS, we can reach all the people we want in all the defined populations. But if we're not putting them into employment, it's all for naught, right? Likewise, this employed in the fourth quarter, also very important, because it gives us an idea, are people staying at the jobs, right? Is there longevity to it? Gives us an idea of the quality and the fit. And then when we want to talk about job quality, really median earnings is the best aggregate way to look at that and to understand, is this a livable wage, right? Knowing that, there's people in a median that are earning 4 times as much as this number, and people earning half as much. You talk about it, the credential rate. A lot of what we do is training, and we know that training provides a bump in employment outcomes and in wages. So this credential rate is very important because it's a precursor to kind of tell us, what can we expect in the future. It's a little bit more leading for us, and it's an important part of, we spend probably 25% of our money just on straight up training, right? And so this is an important number. And then there's the measurable skills gain, which Nancy touched on that one a little bit. That's very important for some of those educational outcomes, right? Because we do have some educational components to our employment and training. What's beautiful about these is I report this number exactly the same way as Milt does in the North. I report every one of these numbers exactly the same way as Wagner Pizer does in Title III. I report these numbers exactly the same way as Nancy does in Title II. And you can look at Drazen's numbers. It's the same case. Probably the only exception to this rule is possibly TANF, and they're building out that infrastructure. But this is the basics. This is, can you dribble and pass in basketball? Can you block and tackle in football? Right? If we don't keep our eyes on this, it doesn't matter what we're looking at and what we're doing. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what the wage, we don't know what the return is. And I'm going to stop with that because I'm passionate that this is the answer. This will tell you clearly what the numbers are. We can all do it, and then we can spark discussion from there and drill in.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Let me go to Mr. Goodrich before I reply. Go ahead, Mr. Goodrich.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Miller. Great information. Thank you. And so just so I'm looking at this, and I won't dig into this very much, but would you assume if we go in the adult column, employed fourth quarter after exit, 1,611, that would assume 1,611 jobs, correct? That's lasted 4 quarters or a year, right?
Yes. Well, not lasted. They were employed in that 6-month measurement period, in that quarterly measurement period.
And then, without putting a tracker on people, I imagine it'll be very difficult to see what the lasting effects of these jobs are, correct?
The unfortunate thing is we only have a legal mandate to track for 4 quarters or 1 year. To understand that long-term stuff, we really need to look at things like Empower and the longitudinal database. And that's more of a long-term, I'm going to say academic type of study, right? So
So, well, this is, and if every agency provides this same data, I don't know why we wouldn't just work off this. Now, again, it appears to me that some of this commentary I'm giving you is just plain ignorance or poor onboarding onto the board, and including, I'm indicting myself on that as well. But when we continue to have the data talk, if every agency puts out the same thing, why don't we just use this and we can move on from the data talk?
Kent, Vice Chair Evans, for the record, I'm in, at the risk of speaking for the entire board, I'm in agreement and alignment with what you just suggested. In fact, Mr. Miller has provided similar information before where I think there was some, I'm going to say, initial agreement and alignment at that time. I think it's a matter of getting all parties involved to agree with that, as well as let me give an example. Getting everybody on the board, as well as the titles and everybody else concerned, to understand that even with this data, there are going to be some questions, especially if, for an example, I'm going to use the term unit cost because that's what we use in my construction field. You're concerned about the unit cost because that helps you determine, and I'll say job unit cost, because potentially that helps you determine how efficient, how effective somebody is at interacting, engaging the system, and getting through the system. The other thing that I would point out, because it bears repeating and emphasis, is that it's important that long-term we tie what we do to Empower, because that has the potential to track people throughout their entire time in our system and then some. I'll stop there. Ms. Olson, and then I'll go to Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I wanted to mention is that adult education reports annually at the federal level. We have data that, we are collecting all the time, but if you look at the data, at least part of the data, on a quarterly basis, it is not going to look the same. So that is something to consider. And then, as I mentioned before, even though we are reporting the performance measures basically the same way, there are times where the cohorts or the population that it is reported for is considerably different. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Olson, for that insight. Mr. Stewart?
Milt Stewart for the record. So, yeah, thanks for the unit cost analogy. I think that, and this is getting into the weeds, and we talked about this at the retreat at CSN. One of the things that's important to remember, and maybe this really aligns with what Nancy was just saying, is that with a business with unit costs, you can control inputs, right? You have control over inputs and outputs, really. And there is no agency that's telling you, you have to use these as inputs. And here's what I mean by that. WIOA is targeted towards those individuals with barriers. So when we talk about unit cost or we talk about efficiencies, we have to be clear and understand that it's more than just a cost per, right? Because those barriers can fluctuate, but the reality is that if we use terminology like highest performing, do they touch the system? Yes. Are they part of the overall numbers? Absolutely. But our mandate, particularly with adult funding, is that the local boards are required to spend a minimum of 75% on individuals with one or more barriers to employment. And so further, in an economy like this, the folks that are coming into the centers generally have multiple barriers to employment. Removal of barriers equals cost, right, and time. And so I would just say that it's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation than unit cost, and or for the board and partners to understand what's baked into that unit cost measurement. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Stewart. And I definitely agree. In fact, Mr. Goodrich, what I would share with you is one of our subcommittees is a underserved populations and barriers subcommittee for precisely the point that Mr. Stewart just brought up. We recognize that we are chartered as a system statewide to service underserved populations, if not quote unquote challenged segments of the population. As such, it's not as simple as a unit cost. So we definitely recognize that. What I would also suggest is part of the reason why we want to ask for certain data is such that whether it's at the full board level or definitely if it's in that subcommittee level, we want to be able to drill down and find out, for example, are there systemic things that these individuals are running into? And if so, do we need to ask for more resources from an equitable standpoint in order to make sure that they have a decent shot of one, interacting with the system, two, completing their engagement with the system, and then ultimately getting some type of employment upon completion of their interaction. So that's recognized. I wanted to find out, I'm kind of picking on him here, but he's been involved as well. Mr. Yoder, do you have any feedback regarding the data? And again, I know I'm kind of surprising you here, but you've been making this journey with several of us for a while. And if you're comfortable and want to, I wanted to give you an opportunity to provide some insight.
Well, I appreciate it. We've tried to sort of mirror the data that we see our title partners reporting, and ours does vary a little bit. We don't get our funding from the Department of Labor. We don't get any WIOA funding, so we're kind of like a fifth wheel in the WIOA world. Mandated partner under WIOA. Been doing workforce development for probably since 96, I assume, during welfare reform. I've been doing it for almost 20 years since we came in here, before we even started partnering. But lo and behold, the welfare TANF program has largely been in the past a compliance-based program, not necessarily a workforce development focused program. So the TANF, as you know, is cash assistance, temporary assistance for needy families. And the primary focus has been getting folks the assistance they need. We had a employment and training department going back since welfare reform that took on changes of approach over the years, from going to work first to seeing reports and data that showed that work first does not get families out of poverty permanently. It's more successful if you help to develop an individual to try and gear them toward a career, not just say, we're going to close your case unless you come back and report a job. You know, people go out and get a minimum wage job, and that doesn't lift them out of poverty. So in the past, since we started partnering with WIOA, we started developing more data, though, on the workforce development side. It always used to be a compliance-based program so that people got the cash assistance that they needed. We didn't have a specialization necessarily. The employment and training program was allowed to spend, I'd say $2,500 maybe, or $3,000 maximum on training. The focus wasn't as much on doing resumes or job prep as it was to get the people to do their 20 or 30 hours a week. So we do not have a system in place that captures pretty much any of the data that the partners and that we now are capturing just manually through our small unit, workforce development unit, that was created about 6 years ago. We capture everything just on Excel sheets. We don't have the ability to go into the system and input data and then, you know, watch the trends or look at trends or anything like that. So there is a new bill that was put out by the Office of Family Assistance, and I want to find the name of it here so that maybe people who are interested can go see how it's going to change the TANF program tremendously in the coming years, where we are now going to be required by the Federal Office of Family Assistance, that's OFA, and they administer the TANF program across the entire United States. They are switching to a workforce development outcome based what would you call it, compliance system for all states. So we're about to go through major changes to where we're gonna have to develop a data system to track things just like the WIO partners do. And no longer will states be given their TANF funds based on participation because clients volunteered for 20 or 30 hours a week or did these superficial things. We are now going to be tasked with reporting to the feds workforce development outcome data. So we are going to probably develop on a much larger scale throughout the entire state and with this agency a much better data collection system. And right now, like I said, right now we're just trying to mirror what our partners doing manually using Excel.
Okay. That's great insight, Mr. Yoder, especially for where we're headed in the future. And I guess at the risk of oversimplifying, it sounds like you're moving in the direction, especially when you said outcomes driven versus participation. It sounds like you're moving in the direction of measuring, did people end up employed, and maybe to a certain extent the qualifying characteristics, I'm going to call them, of that employment. But the bottom line is, did they end up getting employed? Mr. Perel, did I say your last name correctly?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
So, Mike, Mr. Yoder, just got a quick question. So, you know, we've been using Employee NV for quite some time, and do your staff have access to that? Because of Employee NV, we could actually use that. We could use that for reporting.
Yes, we do. We got with you guys. I forget who helped us out, and several of my staff have Employee NV access, and that is part of our protocol when we get clients, TANF or SNAP, come in for services. We determine what their interest is, what their skills are, their background is. We get them to register, and we take them through it if we need to create a profile on Employee NV. And we've worked with several of your agents to partner with them in connecting our clients to employers. So we'll get our client registered with Employee NV, and we'll use our contact to say, hey, I've got these candidates that are excellent candidates for this job that's posted on Employee NV. Is there any way we can work to get them considered for an interview. And you guys have been a great help in getting some of our folks hired and interviewed with employers that are on Employee NV. So that's been a awesome partnership that is still growing.
So, and the reason I bring up Employee NV is that's kind of how we are able to, I mean, I know Milt, you know, and Brett, we pull numbers out of Employee NV, and there's no reason why we can't use that system to get numbers that'll match what we do with WIOA.
Yeah,
Brett, Milt, you can interject if I think, you know, if that's possible or wrong.
Yes, Brett Miller for the record. I think that's completely possible. I think the key is to do a Wagner-Peiser surface at exit. So that way we have the tracking, and then all we have to know is their ID number, and we can go pull it out of the detailed reports.
and I see Mr. Stewart shaking his head, but for the record, go ahead if you want to verbally acknowledge.
Yeah, Milter, for the record. Yeah, I think that, you know, what John and Brett and really what I would be saying are really aligned, right? Meaning Employee NV has data. It has, you know, we have a data warehouse. There's canned reports in Employee NV. There we can create custom queries. And so there's all sorts of data available that we can align with Title III in particular, because both Title I and Title III use Employee NV. And so we can, you know, sometimes they're the same participants, right? Sometimes they're Wagner-Peiser and they're WIOA. So we can see continuums, and we can see how the system from a 1 and 3 perspective are providing services before, during, after, you know, all of that journey, if you will. So I agree. I think that if nothing else, that's the place to start.
Okay, thank you very much for the record, and I'm going to pick up some more individuals. What I'll say is we'll continue in this discussion for about another 20 minutes or so, and then I do want to talk a bit about the strategic plan before we adjourn. But everything we're discussing now, believe it or not, ties to what we said we wanted to do with the strategic plan, the execution teams, and ultimately improving the system. Mr. Alez, and then Miss Aby, or did I say your last name correctly? I'm big on names, so if I get it wrong, please let me know.
All right, good afternoon. So I just wanted to kind of add a little bit to what was talked about earlier, just to maybe bring in some more context or just more information maybe that we haven't touched on. So I think things that Milt and Brett discussed are important as far as the WIOA performance indicators kind of being the main measures in which how we kind of measure the performance, or how we distill all of this data that we collect into kind of performance measures. So just as far as kind of, because I spent about 10 years in the private sector and kind of in management before I started working for the state. So I understand kind of the need that we need to just kind of narrow down what are the outcomes. And from that standpoint, as our agencies are provided the funds, so for Titles 1 through 3 from Department of Labor, and then for the Title 4, so vocational rehabilitation, our funding comes from Department of Education. But essentially all of our funds are associated with these performance measures. So the WIOA Act, as it was passed, essentially while it kind of confirmed where the funding is going to come from, then it tied that funding with the performance indicators. And all of our agencies essentially have to negotiate with our federal partners those indicators. So as Brett was kind of showing in as far as measurable skills gains, or the employment second quarter after exit, or the fourth quarter after exit, all of these individually we have to negotiate with our federal partners. And then as we kind of come to negotiated rates, those are measured throughout the year. And at least, and I'm not sure for the Department of Labor, but Department of Education, if we don't meet certain measures, then the state has potential of maybe losing some of its funding. So there could be some potential sanctions of us not meeting that. So as far as, I guess, how we would function using those indicators really is kind of our always priority is going to be kind of achieving those measures. So the measures themselves are, as you can kind of see, they're not necessarily focused on numbers. They're more focused on the quality of employment, because that's what VO as a law was focused on. That's why we're kind of looking at the second quarter after exit, are we at, I guess in Title I, it's more in the 70%. It's 70% of people that have gotten a job 6 months later, are they still employed? And then we're looking at a year later, are those people still employed? So that way we can make sure that the training that was provided is beneficial and is kind of leading to long-term employment outcomes. Now, after a year, at that point, you can kind of write, it's difficult to control then, is the training that didn't maintain the employment year later, or is it other reasons? But, and it's kind of Brent mentioned, we really don't have ability to, or legal ability to track them after that year and to know where they are. So in any case, I just wanted to provide that information.
Understood. Definitely appreciate that insight. And what it's leading to is the fact that you're still focused on employment, i.e., if they get a job, 6 months, 12 months, and then if we couple with the Empower system, there'll potentially be the ability to do some longer monitoring beyond that. What I wanted to do is go to, is it Miss Abe or Ab? How do you say your last name?
Abe.
Abe. Okay, Miss Abe, I wanted to go to you, and then I want to circle back with Mr. Goodrich and Miss Brager after that. Go ahead, Miss Abe.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kara Abe. I'm the ESD program chief for the Workforce Innovation Support Service Office. We're part of DETR, and it's my team that oversees the reporting that comes out of Employee NV. Part of that would also include, and I just kind of want to circle back around to what Mr. Yoder was saying about the welfare data and how Mr. Perel mentioned how we can utilize Employee NV to collect that data for welfare for their workforce development unit. This would look like a co-enrollment between welfare Title III for Wagner Pfizer. So we would be able to produce those outcomes once that data has been entered in by welfare's workforce unit.
Okay, thank you very much, Miss Abe.
Thank you.
One thing I'm going to say before I go back to Mr. Goodrich and Ms. Brager is another common theme I'm hearing is we really need to get Nevadans to do two things. If they're unemployed or underemployed, they need to be aware of the Employee NV system. That's one. And then number two, we need to get them to register in the system or sign up for the system so that we can, for lack of a better word, keep tabs on them. But maybe the proactive, positive way I'll say it is so we can provide services to them throughout the course of their unemployment or underemployment. Okay, there's a reason. I'm going to come back to these synopsis that I'm doing on the fly in a few minutes here. And yes, I saw that as well. Educate whether so that we can provide them with the proper education, training, workshops, life skills, etc. Okay, let me go to Mr. Goodrich and then Ms. Berger. You'll be on deck.
Well, certainly a lot of good information in this discussion today. I certainly have learned a lot. I guess at the end of the day, it goes like this. You know, we're all here because we want to help our fellow Nevadans that are struggling with I forgot the term you used, but a meaningful job, meaning a survivable wage, right? I guess. And at the end of the day, the one thing that we got to count is every year, how many people did we help, right? And, you know, part of my discussion at the last boarding meeting was, you know, for me personally, over my course of business, I figured out that helping people, helping my employees, and I usually have to take them from nothing, and we have our own school and such, but taking these people that have no skills and getting to a certain level and watch them grow and take new management positions and get their first home and their new cars and, you know, build their lives is the most rewarding thing for me, right? And so you know, to be able to count how many of these people we helped and every one of us involved in the whole community can be proud of the fact that, well, this year the team I'm on, you know, helped. I'm just making up numbers, obviously. 8,400 people get jobs. Nevada's get jobs, and we did a good thing. And we set a goal as collectively as a community, and we said we'd get 800. We got 400 extra, right? So, you know, we get that benefit of serving, you know, results, positive results for the community. So great information. Thank you, everybody. I think I got some catching up to do, seems to me. And it seems like a lot of much more willing participants than I had been led to believe from my own view, not from anybody else's.
Thank you, Mr. Goodrich. And Ms. Abe just posted something about the employee envy system that we should all be aware of. Thank you very much for sharing that. Ms. Brager.
I appreciate everyone's information, and I would like that we just take it as some of us are novices, number 1, novices 10, whatever we've done through all the years we've been involved, and not take it. We started out in the beginning. It's not a criticism, and it's not meant to come that way, but it can get frustrating when you're not certain what to ask. So you cleared up a lot of things, I feel, but I don't think it's giant reports we're looking for. I think it's a little more simple than that. And I'm not simple. I mean, you know, all know I've served on a number of things over the last 50 years. So we're looking for how many people came into such and such place to get a job. Are they still working? How many spots are left? What do they need to do? Where do we advertise this better? You know, so that they know, is it at the homeless shelter? Is it at McDonald's? Is it at, and I really mean that seriously. And so that's just where I come from. It's never, I mean, trust me, I've been treated horrific by the public many times and being a Clark County commissioner. And then they say they don't mean it, but they do. And I was treated very well compared to others, but so I get it. I get how you feel. It can be sensitive when you know you're working very, very hard, but we're also trying to get the information we need to make a better society through you. So being a team like this, and I'm not on this committee normally, I'm on enough of our committees, but please know it's never meant to be disrespectful or rude. It's frustrating when you just want a simple 2-page scenario and not, you know, 80 or 100 pages, because, you know, we're volunteers and you work more than the hours you probably should. So I just want to say that before we're done today, but I think there's got to be a better way to simplify, and I don't like the word simple, the reports. Trust me, I have to listen to presidents read to me. Shocks me. I'm like, don't read to me, just give me the material. So just know that, please understand that. And it's just that we care. And sometimes we don't know where to actually get what we need. So that's why we need your help. And I sat next to Milt last time. He probably never wants to sit next to me again, but it's just, it's just difficult, to be quite honest. So thank you all. And I know that the end goal is all of us to be there, but we don't really want data in the sense that maybe you look at it. We want it to the point of what we need, and hopefully you can teach us how to ask for it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brager, for that synopsis, as well as vision for cooperation and collaboration, which is ultimately what we want when it's all said and done. Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, I'll keep this brief. Actually, I would say the opposite of Ms. Brager of what you just said. I think that sitting next to each other is a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation in real time when you have a question around something that you're seeing, or a question that was asked that maybe you need contextualized. I appreciated the conversation, so happy to sit next to you anytime, or any of the board members.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I meant it in a
no, I know. I'm just saying. There's a lot.
I do ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. The other thing I would just share with the group, or maybe the committee members, up until quite recently, the U.S. Department of Labor had a lot of restrictions or limitations on outreach, on how the system can make folks aware, like marketing has always been this bad, 4-letter word, if you will. And so those things are tight. There's a notification from the Department of Labor, which has loosened up some of the restrictions. And so we're all kind of navigating through what that looks like, because obviously we don't want to spend the money in a way that it would be disallowed. And so we're just trying to figure all that out. But I say that to say that we hear all the time, and for those of us this is our job, hear many times that, this whole workforce development system is the best kept secret, right? And I think that that's right. But I think as we continue to evolve, and with partnerships like the Governor's Workforce Board, like the local boards, like the chambers, like the other stakeholders, as we can continue to get the word out, I think that that's necessary, right? I mean, we can have all the resources in the world, we can have the best system in the world, but if we can't target and find those folks that we can serve, then what are we really doing here? So I just wanted to contextualize that it's not for lack of trying, it's not for lack of trying to be innovative and resourceful to try and get the system out there in front of folks. We've had some significant limitations over time, which are starting to loosen up now.
And that's good to know. Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, for that context. And what I'm going to do now, because I think it's a great segue, what you and others just mentioned, into segueing into agenda item number 7, which is a discussion about the strategic plan. So with that, I'm going to close out agenda item number 8 and now move to agenda item number 7. Vice Chair will lead a discussion regarding the Governor's Workforce Development Strategic Plan implementation and execution. I mentioned the fact that as we were going through that, first and foremost, between Mr. Goodrich and Ms. Brager, they were talking about data, reporting, but more importantly, the word I'm going to use is impact, meaning what impact is the system making? And I borrowed that language from Mr. Goodrich, so I want to give appropriate cite there. The point is, when it's all said and done, what impact does our system make? And maybe the best way to measure that impact is jobs. And granted, or employment is the official term, but granted by U.S. Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Education, reporting requirements, et cetera. We're supposed to be doing that anyway, but I think what I'm getting at is a mindset or an approach that says, yeah, we appreciate what we're supposed to do from a compliance standpoint, but altruistically, if not aspirationally, what are we really trying to do? We're trying to make an impact on people's lives that are either unemployed or underemployed. Thank you very much, Ms. Brager, for your participation. Okay, so to that end, that may be the metric, performance measure, however you want to put it, that we all need to stay focused on. And with the understanding that it's not a job unit cost, meaning there's going to be varying efficiencies, effectiveness rates, there may be disproportionate resources that if you have to put into it, or a particular client, in order to achieve equity, especially in the underserved or unserved populations. But again, jobs may be the impact that we're looking for. The other thing, and I think we touched on this, several people talked about employee NV. If you will, employee NV is the digital hub, if you will, for how people touch our system, regardless of where they are in the state. And again, I'm just stressing the point, it's a statewide system. So employee NV, two things need to happen. People need to be aware of the system, and they need to have access to the system. And then once they get through on the back end, hopefully they have employment, but beyond just employment, to the point that Mr. Yoder made, hopefully they've got quality employment or long-term employment, i.e. a career. Okay, so that's another component. So where am I going with this? Once again, the idea behind the strategic plan, instead of having a 300, 400, 500-page document, the idea behind the strategic plan was to try to focus on some strategic, big picture items that we could turn into goals, whether the goals were better alignment across the title agencies or the providers, whether one of the goals was making sure that we're being as efficient as possible, meaning if there's duplication or if there needs to be crosstalk to be more efficient. So when it's all said and done, somebody has a one-stop experience, meaning regardless of where they are in the state, they tap into the employee NV system, boom, we got you covered. So that was another one. And then last but not least, I want to say another goal of doing the strategic plan was to put us in a position where, as we're making this journey collectively, if there are resources or additional resources we need, whether they need to come from the state or whether they need to come from the federal government and in turn the state and then local jurisdictions, by implementing and executing on the strategic plan, it would help us to identify it. And to go back to part of the charge of the board, again, our charge is to come up with recommendations, provide guidance, and then kind of be a pulse to both the business community and the overall community for what's going on with the system, so that our desire is proactively to get you more resources. I'm sure there's not a person here, especially if you're a state person, that if I said, do you need more resources, you'd say no. Our goal is to be in a position to be your advocate to get to that point. Not in an accusatory manner, not in an adversarial manner. Yes, we may have to ask some pointed questions, but that's so we better understand the nuances. You know, for example, if you're working with a challenged population, you know, I'm going to use Drazen for a minute here. You have a population that it takes disproportionate amount of resources, not just to get people the basic training, but they may need some additional skills and resources above and beyond just your basic training. Is that safe to say? And you can head nod if it's true. And he's nodding his head in the affirmative. So again, our idea behind the strategic plan was to make this journey together using the execution teams, who in many cases are the frontline providers that can give us two things: the nuances, not just the basic data, but the nuances, and then beyond that, tell us here's the gap that we need to communicate. So here's what I'm going to do. I've tried to set the tone there for what the desire for the strategic plan was, but I want to stop talking and get some feedback, because I know I've missed a couple of meetings. And if there's some input or some context or whatever, I want to stop and listen, because my leadership style is I listen and then I act on what people say to me. And I'll kind of see, I'm going to put somebody on the spot here. Nancy, would you like to kind of provide some starting point or context as well? Because you did chair the last meeting.
Yeah, I did. And as I said in the email that I sent to Katie, started out by presenting the PowerPoint that was presented on the strategic plan. The feedback that I got from members of the subcommittee had to do with lack of opportunity for input, and the fact that there were people on the, or entities on the execution team that were not aware of being included or anything to do with the plan in some cases. So there, and in the time frame, you know, there was definitely some pushback with the realistic possibility of the time frame, otherwise known as an aggressive time frame. And then I shared with the group that I had not had the opportunity to see the strategic plan prior to it going to the governor's office for approval. That the last time I saw it was before it went out to stakeholders for feedback. And then I didn't see it again until after it was approved by the governor's office. So that was kind of where we left things at the strategic planning subcommittee.
Okay. Well, if y'all have been around me, you know, as a leader, when I fall short, I acknowledge it and apologize for it. So what I want to publicly say on the record here is that I acknowledge in our desire and best intentions to complete it, get it staffed properly, and then most importantly, get it briefed to the governor and get the governor's buy-in and approval. If we accelerate it to a point of leaving anyone out, and it sounds like we did, so I'm going to acknowledge that. I apologize for that. It wasn't meant as a malicious slight or anything like that. So then the second part is, and probably just as importantly, I want us to figure out how we can move forward in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration, clean up some things where necessary. And with that, I'll go to, I saw two hands there. I think I saw Mr. Stewart and then Mr. Miller. Go ahead, Mr. Stewart.
Milt Stewart for the record, thanks. Speaking for myself, I don't feel, I feel that, you know, with any of us, you know, in hindsight, could we have done things differently? Sure. And so I'm looking at it from how do we take where we are right now and then move it forward. So I'm going to say, to contextualize my next statement, I want to be very clear about that. But part of the challenge, I think, and this is something that I voiced in the strategic planning meeting was or is that the strategic plan as presented, and maybe there's additional conversations that, you know, or there's an intent to have additional conversations around this, but as I look at the action items and I look at the overall structure, it doesn't seem like it builds in the work that's already being done. So in other words, everything that from a structural perspective, it looks like we're starting from scratch on these things. And I would just share that, at least from a Nevada Works perspective, and I'm sure that Workforce Connections would, and the other partners would chime in. There's a ton of work that's already being done that we can leverage to get to the place that we're looking to go collectively, to get to the place that we're looking to get to. And I feel like that's, you know, was a proper assessment of the work that's already being done, and or how do we leverage and or modify or adapt the work that's already being done to this bigger vision. Those are my comments around this. And it feels disjointed when I look at a document and to look at it, it looks like we're starting from scratch. And when we're not, in a lot of these things, we are absolutely not starting from scratch. And then by virtue of the fact that many of the organizations weren't involved in the development, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying that maybe through this development, the work that's already being done wasn't really conveyed or illustrated or portrayed in that final document, what the next steps would be. And I'll
That's fine. That's fine. That's your feedback is appreciated. And before I reply, I want to hear from Mr. Miller. Go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Brett Miller for the record. I would echo most all of Milt's feedback, and just say that even though there are probably things that we're already doing, right? We'll pan that out, right? The next iteration will be better. And I just look forward to the opportunity to be able to give good feedback as to how we can measure this as a team and get it consistent, right? Without a lot of extra work. And I will leave it at that. I appreciate the work you do, Ken and Ken.
Thank you very much. Before I respond, let me find out, is there anyone else that would like to comment at this time? Okay, I don't see anyone. Okay, Mr. Stewart, Mr. Miller, points well taken, as well as definitely Ms. Olson. Thank you as always for your leadership. I also want to thank in absentia Board Member Esponia for helping to chair the meeting. As I mentioned, I did take a look at the video. I didn't watch it minute for minute, but I think I went through it in a manner where I caught all the highlights. So first and foremost, I appreciate everybody's participation and inputs. And now to the point that Mr. Stewart made, we want to figure out how we move forward, but move forward in a manner that people feel like they're participating, there's some buy-in, and then we go from there. So having said that, once again, let me talk about the intent, and then we'll figure out as we go how to get there. The intent was to have, we extracted out of the compliance plan 3 strategic goals. And these were deliberately arrived at. I know there was participation here, but they were deliberately arrived at because we said if we focus on these 3 strategic goals, we should have a system that is impactful, that people are aware of on the front end, have access to on the front end, and then on the back end, we're producing jobs, but producing jobs that have careers, if not livable wages. So that was part of it. Then what we did, and it was a team effort, maybe accelerated, as we said, how do we turn these strategic goals into compartmentalized objectives, and then beyond that, into some action steps that the board, in its responsibility to make recommendations, provide guidance, as well as real-time input, can come to meetings, look at the strategic plan, get a report on what's happening, and then say, how can we help? And I want to emphasize that. There was a meeting held at one point in time where the idea behind it was, as board members, we need to be aware of how you naturally and organically do your business and report on your business, because we don't want to be an impediment or worse yet, additional administrative burden. Okay. So with that being the case, we said, let's come up with some execution teams that involve the very people that are direct or indirect stakeholders per each strategic goal, objectives, and action steps. And so what I'm hoping, I'm trying to set the table here, not going to try to work it all out today, but I'm trying to set the table here. Here's what I think we need to do at this point. We've made an effort to identify what the execution team should look like. We've also tried to map out the steps, but beyond the steps, some proposed timelines. And let me briefly touch on that. In some cases, the reason why we came up with the timelines that we did is we're anticipating the 2025 legislative session, and we wanted to make enough progress on the strategic plan that we could do 2 things. Talk about progress, but most importantly, if you have shortfalls that require resources, we're going to make sure that we address that in the upcoming legislative session. So that was the goal for the timelines ultimately. It wasn't to add undue pressure or stress to what you're doing, especially if you already have limited resources. So what I'm proposing here is, if everyone could take a look at the strategic plan, and at the next meeting, or maybe we call an ad hoc meeting during the month of October. I don't mind having an ad hoc meeting. I would prefer having an ad hoc meeting during the month of October, but we do a check-in so that there's an opportunity that if there's things that you're already doing, we can take that into account as it relates to the action steps. Because understand this, when we came up with these objectives and action steps, it wasn't to discount anything that you're already doing. It was just to say, what do we think we need to do or know that is happening in order to achieve the ultimate strategic goals. So if you're already doing things, we're that much further to accomplishing the objectives and in turn, the 3 strategic goals. But I think we need to do a check-in in the month of October, because that's going to do 2 things. That's going to give you an opportunity to communicate those kind of things to us. And then at the same time, if there's some things that we need to be aware of as we're making our way with the execution teams, we can find that out as well. Because that's the other thing too, is we propose some execution team members and we're hoping that we can convene them and just get started. Ms. Gilbertson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, Katie Gilbertson, for the record. So at the meeting last week, the subcommittee strategic planning subcommittee meeting, subcommittee chair Olson and subcommittee vice chair Estepona proposed maybe doing a survey to the people on the execution teams. I don't know if you want to go forward with that, just do maybe an ad hoc meeting with everybody on every execution team. That was just proposed from last week.
Let's do the survey. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm prepared to suggest, if not do as a leader, whatever my people suggest that I need to do in order to accomplish the mission. I meant what I said. I listen and then I act. So in my mind, if we need to do a survey within the next few weeks that leads into a meeting, maybe the last half of October as a check-in, absolutely, let's do it. Ms. Olson?
Yeah, Katie, I will tell you that I will not have any time whatsoever until at least October 2nd. Sorry. Got
No.
program monitoring and our federal report that's due October 1st.
No, Ms. Olson, no need to apologize.
Thank you.
You've been an integral part to getting us to where we are now. So no need to, we have a whole lot. I'll quote one of my fraternity brothers who often says, many hands make light work, and we have many hands. So we should be able to get this done. Okay.
Yeah, Vice Chair Evans, we can work on a survey that we can just send out through Google Forms, just maybe to speed it up.
Yep. Let's do that.
It doesn't have
And
to
then-
be hard, complex, you know.
And again, the idea behind it is we want to, if there's feedback we miss or input we've missed, let's get that. And then number 2, let's verify the composition and participation regarding the execution teams, with the understanding that, I hope I've been clear here, the timelines that are there, they're not meant to add pressure or undue stress. Ultimately, we want to help. We want to have enough information that we can go to the legislature and be advocates to get you additional resources. I hope I won't get in trouble for saying what I just said, but that's ultimately what we want to do. Okay, let me, I'm ready to close agenda item number 7, but before I do, is there anyone else? In fact, I'm gonna put him on the spot real quick. Mr. Goodrich, any thoughts? And I know you're getting up to speed, but any thoughts on what I just covered?
No, I'll just go back to one thing you said, one thing you said, which is, really our measure is how many lives we make an impact on, right? And so I think everybody's working towards that. It's pretty obvious, so let's start measuring that and heading down that direction, and collectively, as the community, created a goal every year that's what we're shooting towards. We're going to improve people's lives here.
Thank you, Mr. Goodrich.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and thank you again, Nancy. And just so everyone's aware, myself, Ms. Mr. Goodrich, Ms. Bright, Ms. Olson, and Mr. Espinola, Esteponia, we were part of the strategic group that tried to move things along. So with best intentions. Okay, with that, we'll close out agenda item number 7, and we will move to agenda item number 9. Agenda item number 9 for discussion information only. The vice chair would like to see if there's any new business from the executive committee members. And I already mentioned the fact about doing a survey, and then in addition to that, pulling together an ad hoc meeting, perhaps in the second half of October, so that we can do a check-in on the strategic plan implementation and execution. Is there anything else? And I'm going to open it up, given the nature of how we conducted this meeting, whether it's a executive committee member, title agency, or some of the other key stakeholders that were in attendance today. Is there any business item that you think we need to address? And I'm not seeing anything at this point. Let me do a check-in, Ms. Gilbertson.
I don't see anything.
Okay, thank you very much then. All right, we'll close out agenda item number 9. Before we close out, I'd like to ask if there was any member of the executive committee who arrived after roll call was taken, please identify yourself at this time. And I don't think there was anyone, because we did everything information only today, and it was very productive discussion that's going to keep us moving forward. So that's fine. And then I'm sure you already made a note. We'll carry over the minutes and, you know, actionable items to the next executive committee meeting rather. Okay, with that, let's move on to agenda item number 10. Members of the public are invited for final comments. So this is the second public comments session. Any public comments on the telephone? Okay, any public comments on Zoom? Okay, I don't see any. Let me say again, as the vice chair and on behalf of our chair, Hugh Anderson, thank you again very, very much for your participation, your inputs, your patience, because that is required, and your persistence as well, because I think when it's all said and done, we're all focused on making an impact for individuals that are either unemployed or underemployed in our state. So thank you all again for that. And with that, I hereby move to adjourn this meeting. And I'm giving you back 15 minutes. Thank you all.